Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jody Jones. Luke Mitchell, born in 1988, was the younger of two children. When he was 11, his parents separated, and he stayed with his mother without moving away. The family lived in the small, middle-class town of Eight Houses, Scotland. From a young age, Luke was well-behaved. He enjoyed horseback riding, excelled in school, and had a passion for music. He entered secondary school at St. David. However, during his teenage years, particularly in high school, he began to exhibit unusual behavior. At that time, he met a girl named Jody Jones, who was almost 2 years younger than him. Jody was born in 1989 in another small town in eastern Scotland. The country is generally known for having many small towns located close to one another. Jody was the youngest of 3 children in a middle-class family. Both of her parents worked for the Royal Mail. She was calm, well-mannered, and did well in school. The school director even commented that she had a bright future due to her achievements in class and extracurricular activities. Family was very important to her, and she was a creative person who enjoyed poetry and painting. Jody was close to her eldest sister, Janine. Interestingly, all members of the Jones family had names starting with the letter J, including their parents, James and Judy. The family was decent and appeared genuinely happy until 1998, when the father began experiencing mental health issues and ended his life tragically. This was a devastating blow to the family, and the mother, Judy, had to leave her job to take care of the 3 children. The tragedy affected not only Judy but also the children, who were very worried. Eventually, Janine moved to Mayfield briefly to live with her grandmother, because everything in the house reminded her of the incident. However, after some time, she managed to cope with her problems and returned to her family. Gradually, life returned to normal. Everyone adapted to living without a father, the mother went back to work, and the community supported the family. As a teenager, Jones showed a rebellious streak. She wanted independence and began to experiment with clothes and appearance, listened to heavy rock bands popular at that time, and got herself a piercing. Her mother resisted these changes, particularly when Jody showed interest in alcohol and prohibited substances. She began experimenting with these substances at an early age. Around the time Jody met Luke, they were both 14 years old. The two met at school, became friends, started skipping classes together, and began dating in February 2003. They were deeply in love, and even planned to marry. Jody wrote in her diary that her feelings for Luke were serious and profound, not just a superficial crush. At the start of her relationship, Jody didn't tell her friends or family about her boyfriend, Luke. For some reason, she kept him a secret. This hidden relationship went on for quite some time until she finally decided to share it. She confided in her older sister, Janine, revealing that she had a close relationship with Luke and felt very strong emotions for him. Janine understood the seriousness of the situation and informed their mother, Judy. Judy was of course shocked by the news, but was afraid of pushing her daughter away from her, so she decided to act very carefully. Judy wanted to meet Luke to understand him better, given Jody's deep feelings, and asked Jody to introduce them. In May 2003, Luke returned home with his girlfriend Jody to meet her family and get to know them better. However, things didn't go as planned. Judy learned from Luke that Jody was smoking and drinking with her friends, and Judy also discovered she had tried weed. This makes Judy worried about her daughter's increasingly close interactions and relationship with Luke. Even before the meeting, Judy had looked into Luke's background and learned about some of his unusual habits. Many local people had unfavorable words about him, seeing him as independent and daring, and occasionally rude, though he wasn't involved in any criminal activities. After a brief discussion, Judy was convinced that Luke was a bad influence on her daughter and that their relationship was risky. She forbade them from seeing each other and put her daughter under house arrest until June 30th, hoping this would help her focus on finishing the school year without distractions. However, Judy's plan failed. Luke and Jody continued to meet in secret. Judy found a path Jody used almost daily to sneak out and spend time with Luke. They would kiss near her home and share their frustrations about Judy's strictness. Luke and Jody was eagerly waiting for the end of house arrest to spend their summer vacation together. June 30th finally arrived, and Jody, very much looking forward to it, was thrilled that house arrest would end. She looked forward to seeing Luke and spending time with him freely. As soon as it was 5 p.m., Jody left home. She planned to meet Luke for an evening together. Judy allowed her to go but set a curfew of 8 p.m. However, she did not return home at the appointed time, and Judy couldn't reach her by phone. Worried that something was wrong, Judy began searching for her daughter. When Judy went to Luke's house, Jody was not there. Concerned, she asked Luke about her whereabouts, but he said he hadn't seen her that day. She had not shown up for their meet. This seemed unbelievable, as Jody had eagerly awaited this moment and had hurried to meet him. Judy became angry, suspecting that he was lying. Judy, distraught, did not believe him and demanded he answers, but he insisted he knew nothing. He agreed to accompany Judy to search for she. Luke's parents owned a specially trained dog, so they decided to follow the route she was supposed to have taken. Since there was only one road linking the neighboring towns where they lived, so they searched this route, but did not find she, which was strange. She continued to ignore their calls and messages. Despite this, Judy, Luke, and the dog persisted, keep searching over and over again, but still in vain. Finally, while walking the route again in the dark around 10:30 p.m., the dog picked up a scent in a wooded area and led them there. Luke followed the dog into the forest, using a flashlight. In the distance, he noticed something white on the ground near some walls. As he approached, he made a horrifying discovery. It was Jody's half-naked, disfigured body, tied up. She had been killed in a particularly brutal manner, which deeply shocked both Judy and Luke. Judy became hysterical, trying to aid her daughter, but it was too late. She showed no signs of life, and her body had already cooled. The mother couldn't accept that her daughter was gone. Luke comforted Judy's and called emergency services. Soon after, the police also arrived at the scene, and they were extremely shocked by this discovery. It was a literal bloodbath. Such violence had never occurred in this previously quiet area. Who could commit such a cruel act against a girl? The injuries of Jody resembled those of Elizabeth Short, who was murdered in 1947 in Los Angeles. The girl's body was not only cut in half, but her internal organs were removed. Additionally, on her face was a Glasgow smile, which is a knife cup that extends from one ear to the other. This case is one of the most famous yet to be solved. Due to the similarity of injuries, so the case of the murdered Jody Jones was dubbed Black Scotland by some media outlets. This gruesome incident caused widespread panic among residents of both communities. Locals fear that a vicious maniac has appeared in the area and expect new attacks. To calm the public, police needed to urgently solve the case and incarcerate the dangerous criminal before he struck again. The specially trained dog amazed everyone by leading the search party straight to the body. The girl was found in a hidden spot, known only to her, under a tree, where her and a friend's initials were carved. Some witnesses believed this was not a coincidence but a clue. Jody's body had numerous cuts and stab wounds, primarily on her chest, neck, and head. Her arms had many cuts, indicating she actively tried to defend herself. Her neck was so damaged she was nearly decapitated. She was also severely beaten, with her hair pulled out. The girl was raped, and she died from strangulation. Forensic experts investigated the crime scene and discovered a used condom, along with DNA samples from 3 men on Jody's body. These samples were sent to the lab for analysis. Despite public concerns about a serial killer, the police believed the murder was personal, and Jody was not a random victim. Naturally, suspicion fell on her boyfriend, Luke, whom she was supposed to meet. Typically, those close to the victim are involved in such cases. It was believed that Luke might have been the last person to see her. His calm demeanor and indifference to Jody not meeting him as planned raised eyebrows. Why didn't he call or look for her? Perhaps because he already knew she was dead. Luke was considered suspicious by the police, so they decided to investigate him. Although he had no visible injuries, the numerous defensive wounds on Jody suggested she must have left marks on him. His face and body would likely have been scratched. Jody's mother, Judy, noted that her daughter's rebellious behavior began after meeting Luke, and she blamed him for everything, from her daughter's change in style to her daughter's murder. She claimed that Luke's negative influence had drastically changed her daughter. During that time, Jody behaved so recklessly that she had to be put under house arrest. At school, in addition to her behavioral changes, she experimented with illegal substances. Jody's mother, Judy, believed Luke was directly linked to these issues. Judy also argued that the dog didn't lead Luke to the body. She said he knew the location and led the dog straight to the crime scene. She opposed Luke so strongly that she asked him not to attend the funeral, partly to avoid media attention, as his presence at the service would have drawn interest from local newspapers. Rumors about this spread in both small towns. Rumors spread rapidly, and by the next day, the whole school knew what had happened. There were claims that Luke was involved in the brutal murder. The situation worsened when Judy asked Luke not to attend the funeral to avoid turning it into a spectacle. At that time, everyone believed he was the killer. Luke was known for being eccentric and called himself the town madman, but his oddities were never violent. Police suspect Luke is the one who killed Jody, so they obtained a search warrant for his home to gather evidence and bring charges against him. While searching his room, detectives came across a peculiar picture in numerous bottles filled with urine. They didn't understand why he filled them and kept them at home. He did not provide any explanation for this. And this is just one of many strange things police discovered in his home during their investigation. His home was filled with satanic symbols, and he was notably obsessed with the singer Marilyn Manson. From the point of view of the investigation, all of this is not in the suspect's favor. However, could such eccentricities really indicate he was capable of a violent crime? In spite of his peculiar behavior, Luke denied any involvement in the crime. From the moment the police expressed their suspicions, he insisted that he loved Jody and could never harm her. During his discussion with investigators, he mentioned a hair clip, and this raised suspicion as the hairpin was not seen when her body was discovered. Furthermore, his description of her clothing suggested he saw her later in the day, contradicting his claim that he hadn't seen her after school. According to him, she had different clothes and a hair clip at school, which didn't align with his story. The DNA on the used condom did not match Luke's. However, Luke's DNA was found on Jody's bra among other unidentified samples. The police did not have enough evidence to charge him, but he was still the main suspect in the murder investigation and was called in for questioning. Investigators also spoke with his parents. Local residents' opinion of him turned very negative, and teachers at the school tried to isolate him from other students out of safety concerns, but were unsuccessful. After 2 months, Luke returned to his class, not wanting to study separately. Consequently, the school administration had to suspend Luke from classes for the duration of the investigation. For the next 10 months, Luke remained the sole suspect. The police focused exclusively on him and did not consider other potential suspects. Ultimately, based on circumstantial evidence, Luke, 15 years old, was arrested for the murder of 14-year-old Jody Jones. He also faced charges for possessing and carrying a knife in a school setting. One of the challenges in the investigation, besides the lack of evidence, was determining the motive for the murder. The police faced an issue because Luke was below the age of criminal responsibility. Later, it was revealed that the police committed several violations. Specifically, they were criticized for interrogating the 15-year-old without any adults present, such as his legal guardians or parents, and without a lawyer. The boy was pressured and forced to confess. During this time, law enforcement was more focused on building the case and finding evidence of Luke's guilt. They visited his home again and conducted another search of his room. His house was searched 3 times in total. Surprisingly, no blood was found in the house. However, many suspicious items were discovered and later used to accuse he of a brutal crime. Among these items, investigators confiscated a large number of Marilyn Manson CDs and copies of Manson's film Doppelhers. A particular 10-minute scene in the film, where the main character committed a brutal crime against a black dahlia, was of great interest. Many drew parallels between the film and the real tragedy, leading to the belief that Luke was simply imitating his idols. Investigators suspected that Luke might have timed the massacre to coincide with a cult or ritual inspired by his favorite rock bands. He was eventually arrested, bringing relief to the city's residents, who viewed him as a murderer, Satanist, and psychopath, posing a danger to society. His eccentricities were publicly scrutinized, although they had not harmed anyone, until Jodi's murder. Rumors and sensational stories quickly spread. The case was heard in the Supreme Court of Edinburgh. However, Luke denied any involvement in Jodi's death. The prosecution argued that he was guilty of killing his girlfriend Jodi, pointing out that he discovered her body, even though he used a specially trained dog. Jodi's mother claimed that he brought the dog himself. Additionally, a witness reported seeing a man resembling Luke in a khaki jacket with Jodi near the crime scene, hugging, around the time before she passed away. However, this testimony has caused much controversy, as other witnesses reported seeing 2 men, and the witness ultimately could not positively identify Luke. At the trial, Luke's ex-girlfriend testified that he once threatened her with a knife, which frightened her greatly. However, he claimed he had an alibi, but it was unreliable. Luke's brother stated that on the day of the incident, he was alone in the house watching TV. However, their mother, Corinne, said she was at home with Luke at that time, and the brother was just in his room and mistaken. Despite this, the brother insisted he was alone, watching adult films, which he only did when no one else was home. Eventually, Corinne admitted she had lied, and Luke was indeed not at home. They faced consequences for this, and she was even held accountable. So, where was Luke? He never revealed his whereabouts, and it was impossible to track his phone. The prosecution presented a reconstruction of the events. According to the prosecutor, Luke and Jodi met near a tree with their initials a little after 5 p.m. About 50 minutes later, he was seen alone. The prosecution claimed that he was fascinated by the story of the Black Dahlia and had watched a film of the same name, which included a disturbing scene of a massacre. Witnesses mentioned that he occasionally smoked a pipe. Then, he allegedly contemplated acting out something he saw in the film and harmed Jodi. It was also revealed that he possessed a small case containing a knife, engraved with Jodi's initials and her birth and death years. The case also had a note stating that the best day of he was the one that never came, a quote from Kurt Cobain, who was his idol. While none of this directly proves a crime, but the prosecution interpreted these details as suspicious coincidences, all pointing to he. The prosecutor's office believed Jodi had been killed with a particular knife, but the knife vanished and couldn't be found for comparison. Luke couldn't explain its disappearance. Neighbors of Luke testified during the trial that on the evening of Jodi's death, Luke burned something in his backyard. The prosecution suspected that this was how he disposed of the clothes he wore during the crime. Witnesses mentioned that the fire had a strange odor. However, when police searched his house, they found nothing significant. They did confiscate a large steel barrel used for burning garbage. In total, 122 items were confiscated in connection to the case. Notably, a new khaki jacket which a witness had seen disappeared from Luke's house. The prosecutor suggested that he burned it to hide blood stains. The jacket, purchased by his mother shortly before the murder, was last seen on him that day and then mysteriously vanished, raising further suspicions. A witness, a friend of Luke, testified at the trial. He claimed to have had a strange conversation with Luke shortly before the murder. Luke allegedly said that the best way to kill someone was by cutting their throat and mentioned that Luke could imagine killing someone. That day, Luke was texting Jody, with their last message exchange occurring between 16:35 and 16:54. After 1700 hours, Luke called the information service to ask for the exact time. This was puzzling because if he was at home, as claimed, he could have just checked his watch. The lawyers argued that there was no evidence against Luke. Besides Luke's DNA from 2 other men was found at the crime scene. But only one was identified. It belonged to a friend of Janine. The prosecution suggested that these traces were present because Jody wore Janine's shirt. Luke's DNA was on her bras, and her DNA was on his pants, but since they were in an intimate relationship, the presence of their DNA on each other's clothes was considered irrelevant to the murder case. The defense contended that Luke was eccentric, a fact he didn't deny. Yes, he was a rude teenager interested in strange things, but none of these were direct indicators of guilt. The lawyers attempted to demonstrate that he couldn't have committed the crime against his girlfriend. The numerous stab wounds to the throat nearly detached her head from her body. Forensic experts counted about 20 wounds in the neck area alone, while Jody fought back desperately. Luke would have certainly sustained defensive marks, yet no witnesses or police officers noticed any on him during the search. There were no scratches on his face or body. The lawyers argued that he didn't have a motive for murder. He loved his girlfriend and valued their relationship. Why would he murder her, especially on a day when all restrictions imposed by her mother were lifted? They shared a serious romantic relationship filled with tender feelings and rarely argued. It just didn't make sense. The case was highly controversial, ultimately left for the jury to decide. On January 20th, 2005, the jury began their deliberation. After about 5 hours, they concluded that Luke was guilty of first-degree murder. On February 11th, the verdict stated that the 16-year-old would face at least 20 years in prison before eligibility for parole. However, many still doubted his involvement, believing that 2 people were involved in the murder. This thing allowed he to file several appeals, which were denied. Luke's mother had to sell their house and buy a smaller one to afford the legal fees. She fully supports her son and believes in his innocence. In 2019, a fund was established to raise money to support a man named Luke and to file new appeals on his behalf. However, the site hosting the fund eventually blocked it because it violated the site's terms. Despite these setbacks, Luke remained determined. Since 2003, when he was first accused of killing his girlfriend, he has consistently denied involvement. He made it clear that even if he were offered release in exchange for a confession, he would not accept it because he would never harm Jody, his girlfriend. Luke had numerous supporters who, after hearing the guilty verdict in court, distributed flyers throughout the city proclaiming his innocence. So strong was their support that they even considered storming the prison. Their aim was to highlight what they believed to be Luke's wrongful conviction. However, their approach was questionable. Such actions could potentially harm Luke's case, and they also negatively impacted the Jones family, who were unjustly blamed for the situation and even received threats. In May 2007, the controversial trial resulted in the creation of a documentary about the case, which renewed interest in Luke's case. Moreover, this film revealed numerous irregularities committed by the police in charge of the investigation. Initially, the police considered Luke innocent, although they investigated him as a suspect. However, as more was learned about him, they found unconventional and unknown aspects. Most of the townspeople had a clearly negative opinion. Amid rumors and the extraordinary behavior of the town's eccentric, the investigation ceased to consider other people as suspects. All the evidence was circumstantial. Even Jody's wounds, initially believed to resemble movie cuts, did not match so much. In fact, it was even questioned whether Luke was really a fan of Satanism and Marilyn Manson. He just followed some unpopular trends of his teenage years. To prove his innocence, Luke agreed to take a polygraph test on April 25, 2012. He passed the test successfully. 2 months later, the mother of he also underwent the polygraph test, and experts confirmed that both passed flawlessly. The documentary explored a theory that the murder might have been committed by a student who had written an essay about the murder of a girl in the woods a few weeks before Jody's death. A friend of this student saw him shortly after the crime and noticed scratches on his face. Luke's family believes the investigation overlooked a crucial piece of evidence: condoms containing unknown male DNA. No DNA from Luke was found. They argue that the motive for the murder was rape, with the rapist attacking she and dragging her into the woods. They feel the investigation should focus more on this angle. Additionally, they claimed that when Jody's mother came to Luke's house, he had not yet showered, yet there was no blood on him. They argue that if he were the killer, he would have showered and changed clothes immediately to wash off any blood. Years ago, the crime scene was vandalized with red graffiti referencing Jody's murder. The message included a different name, suggesting that another person might be the murderer. This graffiti is believed to have been painted by Luke's supporters to assert his innocence. Luke's family hired 2 private detectives who identified several suspects, with Mark Kane among them. Mark was a local drug addict who died suddenly in May 2018 at age 38. Witnesses saw him at the crime scene on the day of the murder, with a scratched face and known to carry a knife. He claimed the scratches were from falling into bushes, but no one believed him given the context of Jody's murder. However, despite his suspicious background, all suspects, including Mark, were eventually interrogated and cleared from the list. The family of Jody is certain that the person who killed their daughter is Luke, the one currently in prison. They have no doubt about his guilt. Meanwhile, Luke's family continues their pursuit of justice. Almost 2 decades have passed since his imprisonment, and his legal team has accused investigators of multiple violations, notably the absence of forensic analysis on several DNA samples from Jody, particularly those related to allegations of rape. This significant oversight has cast doubt on the conviction. Luke's lawyers are determined to overturn the sentence. Now 35 years old, Luke might be eligible for parole in 2025. However, he reportedly failed a random test this year. By regulation, after this point, the opportunity for parole will be postponed for another 3 years. The case of Matthew Epen. Sunil and Deborah got married in 1990 after meeting in medical college. Sunil, from Chicago, USA, followed his father's path and became an anesthesiologist, while Deborah worked as an ophthalmologist. Their first child, Brendan, was born in 1994, and their second child, Matthew, born May 24, 1996. They are young parents working in the medical field. They face significant challenges balancing their careers and family life. Both came from respected families with successful backgrounds in education and medicine, motivating them to achieve similar success. They lived in a prestigious area of Boston, Massachusetts, in a lovely home and were financially comfortable enough to hire a nanny. The nanny became like a family member, handling both childcare and household duties, and lived on their property. Deborah soon returned to work part-time, having completed advanced training courses during her pregnancy. Balancing her professional responsibilities with family care was difficult and stressful. The high workload placed on the nannies often led to them leaving due to stress or being dismissed if they couldn't meet the family's expectations. Before hiring 18-year-old Louise Woodward from Cheshire, Great Britain, they used to employ 3 other nannies. Louise lived with her family until she turned 18, then decided to take a gap year in the United States before continuing her education. Although she didn't have formal training, she loved children and got along well with them. She registered as a nanny and housekeeper with a recruiting agency, which helped her move to Boston and find a job. In December 1996, she started working for the Sunil family, whose youngest child, Matthew, was only 8 months old. She had no prior experience with infants, including changing diapers, and had only 3 days of training before she began her job. Louise was given the responsibility of caring for Matthew and 2 years old, Brendan, and assisting with household chores. She quickly found the workload overwhelming due to the family's busy daily routine. All this workload went against Louise's plans, as she had come to the USA seeking adventure and enjoyment, not to work without any days off. She initially thought that being a nanny would provide her with a livelihood without much responsibility. However, looking after children aged 8 months and 2 years truly requires experience, training, and a sense of responsibility. It is challenging to expect an 18-year-old to have such expertise without proper training. Despite this, Sunil and Deborah, who were desperate for help, accepted Louise since they needed a nanny housekeeper. Furthermore, her services were affordable. However, Louise's behavior did not meet the family's high standards, so they gave her a list of rules to follow. As a young nanny, she had little choice because previous failures with other families had put her at risk of being dismissed by the agency. She needed to keep her job to maintain her income. It was challenging for her to suppress her youthful, free spirit, as she preferred to walk, chat with friends, and attend parties rather than focus on work. Occasionally, she would wander around Boston and indulge in her dreams. However, she started refusing work more often, frequently asking for time off, and spending a lot of time on herself. She began taking daily walks, returning late in the evening, regularly attending parties, and struggling to wake up in the morning, often sleeping until nearly lunchtime. This behavior disappointed the Epens, as she would spend hours chatting with her family in the UK, neglecting her responsibilities with the children. One day, Deborah came home from work earlier than usual and found the children sleeping at home alone without any supervision. Later, the nanny Louise returned from a party. There were suspicions that similar incidents had occurred before. Naturally, Sunil and Deborah felt worried about their children and they were not happy with her. They spoke to her and imposed a curfew, but it didn't solve the problem. They were very unhappy with her behavior and felt they weren't getting their money's worth for services. Although they still wanted to trust her, they saw her as lazy and irresponsible. So, the relationship which she began to significantly deteriorate a few days before the unfortunate incident. She openly told Sunil that she didn't enjoy being a nanny and didn't want children because it was difficult, yet she pleaded not to be fired because she desperately needed the job. Sunil made more rules to discipline her, to get the nanny at the level they desired. On February 3, 1997, Deborah informed Louise that she could leave if anything was not to her liking. However, Louise, the nanny, resisted the idea, insisting there was no need to rush and that she was willing to accept and adhere to their new, stricter conditions. They agreed but mentioned they needed to change the children's sleep schedule by limiting sleep after 3 p.m. to prevent disrupting their nighttime rest. This change was not aimed at Louise personally but was necessary to reorganize the children's daily routine. Shortly after this, a terrible tragedy occurred. The tragedy happened just 10 weeks after Louise began her job. On February 4, 1997, Louise woke the children up in the morning after the parents left for work. She mentioned that Matthew was unusually fussy and cried a lot from the start of the day. Louise bathed him and then put him back to bed to calm him down. At 3:15 p.m., she went to wake him up from his nap and noticed he was breathing weakly and irregularly. She took him to the living room to perform CPR, but he remained unconscious. Initially, she couldn't reach Sunil and Deborah and only called 911 at 3:45 p.m. to report that Matthew, the 8-month-old, was not breathing. Louise informed the coordinator that the baby might have choked on vomit because his face was turning blue. Emergency services arrived quickly. The child was alive but in critical condition. The doctors rushed him to the children's hospital, where they found that Matthew had much more severe injuries than initially reported. Matthew, an 8-month-old baby, was found to have a 10-centimeter crack at the base of his skull, bleeding in his eyes, a hematoma between the skull and brain, and bleeding in his neck and back of the brain. He also had a broken wrist, and vomit was found in his trachea. He was urgently taken to the operating room for brain surgery and connected him to a life support machine because he was in a coma. Experienced doctors suggested that these injuries were caused by being violently shaken and hit on the head. In pediatrics, this is known as shaken baby syndrome. Babies are born with disproportionately large heads and weak neck muscles, making them vulnerable to injury when shaken. The unfixed head will dangle when shaken, causing damage to brain cell membranes and brain injury. When a baby is shaken, the brain moves back and forth inside the skull, leading to swelling and bleeding. Adults often shake babies out of frustration when they cry, not realizing it won't calm them down but will make them cry more. Continued shaking can cause severe injuries or even be fatal. Most cases occur in children up to 2 years old, but even a 4 years old can suffer greatly from such shaking. Around 4 p.m., Deborah, Matthew's mother, noticed she had missed a call from Louise at 3:15 p.m. and also saw an urgent text message from she. Concerned, she left her patient at the hospital and called she, who explained the situation. Deborah was furious. She asked for leave from work and rushed to the hospital where Matthew was admitted. On the way, she prayed that her son would be okay. Upon arrival, she informed the doctors of her medical expertise, as she was an ophthalmologist, and asked to examine her baby. She quickly discovered severe Matthew's eye hemorrhaging. Meanwhile, the doctors alerted the police about the baby's serious injuries, prompting law enforcement to visit the Epen family home to question the nanny. Louise. Louise was at home, looking upset and concerned, with Brendan. She explained that Matthew had been irritable and difficult since the morning, and despite her efforts to calm him, nothing worked. By the end of the conversation, she confessed to possibly being a bit harsh with him. Overwhelmed by his continuous crying and screaming, she shook him to try to soothe him, but it was ineffective. In frustration, she threw him onto a pile of towels on the bed. While taking him to the bathroom, she accidentally dropped him, which caused him to hit his head on the floor. Her account was alarming, given the severity of Matthew's injuries. The following day, the police arrested Louise on charges of assaulting a child. Matthew's condition was not improving, and doctors were sure he had no hope of recovery. The brain injury was so severe that, even if he survived, he would be paralyzed for life. Sunil and Deborah, who were also medically educated, understood this. On February 9, 1997, they made the difficult decision to disconnect Matthew from life support, worsening Louise's situation as she was accused of murder. She was denied bail before the trial, but continued to insist on her innocence, maintaining it was a tragic accident. Before the trial on May 7, 1997, Louise agreed to take a polygraph test. During the test, she was asked if she had caused physical harm to Matthew on that day. She denied causing any injury, and a lie detector expert concluded her answers were truthful with 95% confidence. Another expert, hired by her lawyers, also confirmed that she answered all questions truthfully. On October 7, 1997, a trial began in Cambridge, Massachusetts, involving many medical experts, including neurosurgeons, pediatricians, ophthalmologists, and pathologists, all of whom were familiar with similar crimes. In the courtroom, there was extensive discussion about Matthew's injuries and Louise's behavior. Most experts believed that his injuries were caused by abuse and violence. Many doubted Louise's statement that she had accidentally hit the boy's head, noting that the injuries showed signs of blunt force trauma. The child had probably been severely and brutally beaten, and the injuries appeared fresh. An expert for the prosecution initially compared Matthew's injury to those from a fall from the second floor, but this statement was later withdrawn. The defense argued that Matthew's head and wrist injuries occurred weeks prior to the incident, before the nanny was in their home. The lawyer suggested that the child's parents, Sunil and Deborah, could have been involved in neglect or abuse. In court, Louise stated that she had not noticed any injuries to Matthew's head or arm. She explained that her interaction with the child was mild, but it caused the reopening of an old injury, leading to bleeding. She mentioned that the day before the tragic incident, the child fell near the stairs and hurt himself, which might have aggravated the injury. Louise clarified that her use of British English was misunderstood. When she said popped, she meant she placed the child on the bed, not through him, as might be interpreted in American English, and she denied dropping the baby in the bathtub. The defense argued that if the prosecution's claim of cruel treatment were true, Matthew would have had serious bruises and hematomas on the head and body, which were not present. This suggests that the child might have been shaken to calm him down, but not to the extent the prosecution claimed. Louise, in an emotional outburst, lost control and shook the child, causing old injuries to resurface. Witnesses and experts testified that there was no fresh bleeding in the brain, indicating that the skull fracture was an older injury. However, Sunil Va Deborah denied that Matthew had suffered such a traumatic brain injury. The defense suggested that these actions might have been driven by fear, as Louise panicked while trying to revive the child. Unfortunately, Brendan could not testify at the trial because he was too young to understand what had happened. During the trial, Louise acted inappropriately. She occasionally smirked and laughed, which was attributed to nervous shock. At the time, she was reportedly only 18 years old, and the incident described triggered such a reaction. Additionally, she retracted her initial testimony obtained by detectives during the first interview. She did not mention how challenging it was to work for the Epen family, who overwhelmed her with childcare and household duties, for which she was unprepared. She had come to the United States to relax and have fun. Despite this, she insisted that she never mistreated the children. She claimed she would never harm a child, especially to the extent of causing serious injuries that led to a coma and could paralyze an 8-month-old baby. Louise's relatives from the UK spoke at the trial, praising her as a gentle and reserved person. They described her as an obedient parishioner of a local church, a vegetarian, and a clarinet player. However, her friends from the US had a different view, seeing her as a party girl who never missed a chance to go out. 3 of her friends testified at the trial, as well as former employers who had let her go due to incompetence and irresponsibility. The prosecution highlighted that she tried to wake Matthew 15 to 20 times but found the boy wasn't breathing. She attempted to help him and called his parents, but they didn't answer. It took her half an hour to finally call 911. The prosecutor questioned why she delayed calling for emergency help when immediate action was needed. She explained that she was panicking and stressed, trying hard to manage the situation on her own. Throughout the trial, Louise showed little emotion. She occasionally smiled but never expressed regret for what happened. She spoke fondly of Brendan and Matthew, she describing Brendan as smart and talkative, and Matthew as a sweet, smiling, and playful child. The trial was broadcast live on British television, capturing the attention of almost the entire country, with many people supporting she. On October 30th, 1997, a jury found Louise Woodward guilty of second-degree murder. She begged the judge to lighten her sentence. She begged them not to let her spend the rest of her life in prison for something she didn't do. However, the judge ignored her pleas. Louise was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Upon hearing the sentence, she burst into tears, unable to believe what was happening. She questioned the judge, insisting that she hadn't done anything wrong and sincerely hoped for an acquittal. Her mother supported her, stating in court that a terrible judicial error had occurred. She argued that her daughter could not have harmed a defenseless child and that she was innocent and did not deserve such a harsh punishment. In fact, the jury's opinions were mixed. Many people believe that Louise is innocent in Matthew's death, attributing it to an old injury. However, after further deliberation, the jury concluded she was guilty. It later emerged that those who initially supported acquittal were persuaded to vote guilty. This thing sparked significant public outcry in both the United States and Louise's home country, Britain. Many people in the UK donated funds to assist Louise and her family, totaling about $500,000. Additionally, there were mass protests from supporters who believed Louise was an innocent victim of the US legal system. This public pressure led to the conviction being overturned by the judge 10 days later. By then, Louise had already spent about 8 months in prison. After reviewing the case materials, the new judge concluded that Louise's actions were due to her inexperience and immaturity, not malicious intent, and that murder was not her purpose. Louise was sentenced to the time she had already spent in prison awaiting trial, which was 289 days, allowing her to be immediately released. Her supporters celebrated her release like a holiday. Meanwhile, the death of Matthew, the 8-month-old child, was largely overlooked. Even if his death wasn't her fault, his parents sought justice for their child, and the prosecutor was determined to see Louise imprisoned for a longer period. He noted that he had recently been involved in a trial where a father was accused of killing a child in a similar case, and that father remained in prison. He questioned why Louise, a nanny, was released, viewing it as unfair and contradictory given the prevalence of similar cases in U.S. judicial practice. Louise was released from prison after serving less time than it took. She returned to her hometown in the UK in 1998 and enrolled in the Faculty of Law at London South Bank University. She explained that her interest in law developed during the trial, as she engaged deeply with legal matters to better understand the proceedings. Thus, choosing law as a profession felt natural and obvious to her. While pursuing her studies, Louise decided to fulfill another dream, learning to dance. She took salsa lessons and later opened her own dance school, becoming a dance instructor. Her classes included children, often accompanied by their mothers, who were comfortable with her past and aware of the accusations against her. In 2002, Louise graduated with honors from university and began working as a lawyer. However, a year later, she left her law firm to return to her dance studio. She then married businessman Anthony Elkis, who worked in cargo transportation, and they had a daughter. By 2014, Louise had authored several books and participated in numerous interviews about past incident. In all interviews, she has insisted that she was wrongly accused of Matthew's death. She insisted she had no intention to harm and believed her arrest was unjust. She remarked that the U.S. judicial system often demands accountability, suggesting that if the parents weren't blamed, the suspicion fell on her. Still, She expressed relief and gratitude that the judicial system ultimately resolved the case, leading to her release. Louise, now 45 years old, continues to live a normal life without feeling guilty about the past, and many people support her in this. In one of her interviews, she stated that she had the right to enjoy her life. Meanwhile, the parents of Matthew, Deborah, and Sunil faced public outrage. People criticized them for prioritizing their careers over spending time with their children, questioning why they hired an inexperienced young nanny who was not equipped to care for small children. Despite knowing this, they were attracted because the cost of hiring her would be very low and burdened her with excessive responsibilities. The 18-year-old nanny, Louise, received only 3 days of training before being overwhelmed with numerous restrictions and rules. Due to public pressure, the Heighten family had to relocate to a new, undisclosed address. It is known that they now have 2 more children and no longer hire nannies, with Deborah taking on the responsibility of raising the children herself. They established the Matthew Heighten Foundation at Boston Children's Hospital to enhance child safety and well-being by educating the public about the dangers of shaking a baby and providing support to victims and their families. The case of Solomon family. Angela grew up in a religious family in Nashville, USA. She was talented in singing and excelled academically. Then, she earned a doctorate in pharmacy and was successful in her career, which allowed her to earn a good income. She bought a house and lived a fulfilling life. In 2001, she reconnected with Aaron Solomon, a charismatic guy she had known since school. He was a sports presenter on a TV channel and made a good impression on her. The couple started dating, and just a few months later, Angela became pregnant with a son. In 2002, their first child was born, named Grant. Immediately after that, Aaron proposed to Angela, but their relationship was complicated, and she was unsure about marriage. She initially planned to raise the child on her own. However, her religious family pressured her to marry, and she eventually agreed. Aaron turned out to be a caring father and loving husband, and their relationship improved. For years after their wedding, in October 2006, they welcomed a daughter named Gracie. Grant, who was 4 years old at the time, was thrilled to have a younger sister. He stayed by her crib and helped his mother with her care. Then, he began playing baseball and became a successful player on his school team, gaining popularity among his peers. After the birth of Gracie, the parents' relationship worsened. Aaron was a controlling and possessive man who insulted his wife and children while having multiple affairs. He used his status as a presenter to start many affairs. In 2013, 7 years old, Gracie told her mother that her father was bothering her during bath time. It was discovered that Aaron had prohibited his wife from bathing their daughter, insisting on doing it himself, and even filmed his daughter without clothes. Angela forbade Aaron from bathing or touching their daughter. Although he admitted to his actions, he threatened Angela, warning that he would take their children away if Angela told anyone. As an active church member, he demanded complete obedience from his family, so Angela felt compelled to remain silent. Angela finds out that Aaron has cheated on many other girls and learned he was molesting minors. In 2014, explicit photos of minors were found on his phone, but the incident was covered up and he lost his job. However, then he found a new job as a financial consultant at a large bank. The couple began to argue more often. Angela wanted a divorce, but Aaron refused and suggested they see a family psychologist. Angela agreed, and during therapy, it was revealed that she had been dealing with victim syndrome throughout her life. Her parents had been harsh, imposing their religious beliefs on her, and she had entered an unfortunate marriage with Aaron, who was narcissistic and struggled with sexual addiction. The sessions didn't help with their family problems. Angela found another psychologist she trusted and shared all the details of her life and family issues. She started considering a plan to leave Aaron. who was controlling and wouldn't let her go. She kept notes on her phone and communicated with the psychologist via email. However, Aaron was secretly listening to her therapy sessions, checking her phone and email, and was aware of all her plans. She complained to her parents about Aaron's troubling behavior, but they didn't support her. They sided with he, believing, due to their faith, that a woman should endure her husband's behavior and keep the household intact. She felt unsupported by everyone. Aaron's behavior deteriorated, and he started to become violent towards his wife and children. The children, wanting to protect their mother, they began sleeping in the same room out of fear of their father. One day, Aaron attacked Angela in the bathroom, attempting to strangle her with a hairdryer cord. She was ready to say goodbye to life when her 11-year-old son, Grant, intervened and managed to stop his father. Terrified, she and the children chose not to tell anyone about the incident and did not report Aaron to the police. However, he called 911, falsely claiming that she had tried to end her life using the cord. She was then hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation, despite asserting that she was mentally sound. Eventually, doctors reassured her that she was indeed healthy. Angela's psychotherapist learned about her situation and shared their correspondence, explaining that Angela was a victim of domestic violence. Angela was discharged from the hospital on May 11, 2013, and was advised to obtain a restraining order against her husband. Medical records confirmed she was not depressed, had no end-your-life thoughts, no history of mental health issues. However, she was indeed a victim of domestic violence and was in a dangerous situation. After her release, Angela was determined to secure a restraining order against her husband and file for divorce. Upon returning home, she found the house empty. She attempted to contact Aaron, but he did not respond. She also tried calling her own parents and his parents, but received no answer. Her relatives dismissed her as mentally ill and ignored her. The next day, May 12, was Mother's Day. Angela hoped Aaron would bring the children to visit her, but instead, the police arrived at her house. He had falsely reported to 911 that she was attempting to end her life. The police checked on her, but they found no cause for concern and left. Time passed, and Angela received a restraining order but still did not know where the children were. She contacted the police several times, asking them to locate the children, but they refused to take her statement because the children were with their father, Darren, who had the legal right to have them. He had not kidnapped them. She soon discovered that he had filed for divorce first and had obtained a restraining order against her. He claimed she was a danger to him and the children. Divorce proceedings began, and both his parents and her parents spoke against her. As a result, he was granted full custody of the children, and the court ordered she to pay child support. The children were not present in court and were not asked with whom they wanted to stay. The judge noted that she had been in a mental hospital, which was enough to deny her custody claims. She couldn't do anything about her children. Angela continued to live with her father and fought hard to challenge the guardianship, arguing that the children were not well with Aaron. A retrial for the guardianship case was scheduled. He hired top lawyers for the case, having recently received a large inheritance from a wealthy aunt who had passed away. During the trial, Angela's relatives once again testified against her, alleging she was intent to end her life. However, this time, psychotherapists and staff from the psychiatric hospital defended her. They confidently stated that she was a victim of Aaron's abusive behavior and had never attempted to end her life. Her injuries were inflicted by her husband. Despite this, the judge ignored their testimony and awarded full custody to Aaron. Angela did not give up and repeatedly challenged the custody decision, eventually securing the right to see her children for 2 hours a week. When she finally saw them, she was shocked by their condition. Both Grant and Gracie had lost weight, and Gracie had severe bruises under her eyes. Aaron disciplined them harshly, using physical violence, enforcing a strict diet, and banning unhealthy and sweet foods. Grant once jumped out of a moving car to escape from his father and was injured. The children were told by their father that their mother, Angela, was dead when she was actually placed in a mental hospital. He also said it was unsafe there, so they needed to move. The children believed their father at the time because they saw their mother in a bad state after being strangled and felt hopeless, thinking no one could help them. Angela fought to gain full custody of the children, which required her to undergo a psychiatric examination to prove her mental health. She passed the examination successfully. In 2014, the court increased Angela's child visitation rights to 6 hours per week, but kept the children with their father. She continued her legal battle. In early 2015, Angela received devastating news. Aaron had been raping 9-year-old Gracie for several months. The frightened girl felt she couldn't tell anyone. She described feeling sleepy and falling asleep after eating. Then she wake up in her father's bed with severe pain in her crotch and bruises on her thighs. She didn't know how the bruises got there. Her father, Aaron, claimed it was a rash from her bathing suit, but she knew that wasn't true. He never took them to the doctor, fearing exposure, even when they were very sick. Gracie recounted how Aaron beat them, drove recklessly to scare them, and neglected their basic needs. Angela was horrified by this information and tried to use it to gain custody of the children from Aaron, their abusive father, awaiting a new trial. In April 2015, Aaron filed a complaint against Angela for not paying child support, leading to her arrest. She argued that Aaron was not properly caring for the children and was using the child support money for himself and his lovers, despite having inherited wealth. Angela was later released and continued to pay child support. She fought for her children for several more years, reporting Aaron to law enforcement, contacting his church, and warning the church school about the danger he posed. However, no one took her seriously, and everyone thought she was crazy. In 2018, Grant and Gracie ran away from home. Aaron immediately contacted the police, and the children were found quickly. When they returned, Aaron punished them harshly. Angela, upon discovering this, requested an emergency custody hearing due to Aaron's abusive behavior. On August 17, 2018, during Grant's baseball tournament, Aaron and Gracie came to watch the match. After the match, Aaron took Gracie with him, while Grant stayed at the sports camp. Aaron rented a hotel room with only one bed for the night. Despite 12-year-old Gracie's request for a room with 2 beds, Aaron raped her that night. The following day, on August 18th, an emergency custody hearing took place. Gracie disclosed what her father had done, but Aaron's lawyer denied the allegations, suggesting that Gracie imagined the incident and arguing that Aaron, being a loving father, couldn't have committed such an act. Later, Grant testified that his father was abusive, beat him, fed him poorly, humiliated him, and forced him to train all day. Both children expressed their desire to live with their mother, not their father. However, the judge did not believe them. He concluded that Angela and the children were lying to damage Aaron's reputation because Aaron attended the same Grace Church as the judge and a senator, where he was well regarded. This was a closed, deeply religious community. Aaron attended church every Sunday, never missing an event, and was well regarded by the community's elite. People couldn't believe that Aaron was capable of such monstrous behavior. And there is no evidence that he abused the children. The judge dismissed Angela's request for custody. During the trial, Gracie clung to her mother and was reluctant to leave with her father. However, when her father threatened to call the police, she had no choice but to go with him. The mother lost custody rights, but the children were unable to stay with their father either. Gracie and Grant sought help from school staff, a psychologist, and the church, sharing the terrible things their father had done to them. However, the principal called them in and urged them to remain silent to protect both their and their father's reputations. Despite their efforts to explain why they didn't want to return home, the principal dismissed their claims, saying he had heard it all before and didn't believe them. He contacted their father, who then removed them from school. Nobody believed the children, as everyone thought Angela had coerced them into falsely accusing their father. One day, Gracie and Grant couldn't take it anymore and ran to their mother, Angela. Then, Aaron came to look for them and asked them to return. Grant and Gracie refused, and he allowed them to live temporarily with their mother. With the help of therapy, they set boundaries, and their father began to respect them. Grant and Gracie sometimes had to live with their father, as he still had more custody rights, but most of the time they lived with their mother. During those times, they were happy, and the relationship with their father became more tense and reached its peak. On July 20th, 2020, 18-year-old Grant was driving to his training, which was about an hour away from Angela's house. Upon arriving at the parking lot, a tragic accident occurred in which Grant lost his life. His father, Aaron, who was also at the training, witnessed the incident. He immediately called 911 for help for his son. Aaron later recounted the event. Aaron explained that he had exited his pickup truck to retrieve his gear from the back. While standing in the parking lot near the building, he was focused on his phone and did not notice the pickup rolling backwards. The vehicle hit him, dragging him several meters before it went down a deep ditch. Aaron, who was there with 3 others, saw everything unfold. When the police arrived, they found Grant lying on his back beneath the front of a car, but the tires were not touching him. Blood was streaming from his nose and ears. Using a jack, they managed to lift the car and pulled him out. He was still breathing, so they performed CPR and rushed him to the hospital. Unfortunately, despite their efforts, Grant, who was in serious condition, died on the way without regaining consciousness. Although he had multiple injuries, but the official cause of death was cardiac arrest. Strangely, Aaron accompanied him to the hospital and signed papers preventing an autopsy and organ donation. When Angela learned about the incident, she hurried to the hospital and requested an autopsy, but her pleas were ignored. The police classified the case as an accident and didn't pursue further investigation. Angela believed Aaron's account of the incident was false, pointing to various inconsistencies. Grant's injuries didn't match those of someone trapped under a car. He had no typical crushing injuries. The hospital recorded just 1 head injury and 3 bruises, on his jaw, left hip, and right hip. Aaron claimed Grant drove a pickup for about an hour to reach his training, yet there were no burn marks from a hot car, nor were there abrasions from being dragged on asphalt. At the scene of the tragedy, there was no blood, and Grant's shoes were completely clean, which contradicted Aaron's story. The grass near the car's exit and the path where the body was dragged were untouched. There weren't even tire tracks where they should have been. Instead, they were found on the other side of the sidewalk. Grant's glasses were discovered there too. He always wore his glasses because he had poor vision without them, shown in all his photos. So, how did his glasses end up on the sidewalk if he wasn't there? He was in the parking lot. Why didn't his glasses fall there when the car allegedly ran over him? According to Aaron, Grant had his back to the car and didn't see it coming when it moved in reverse. Strangely, Grant was found lying on his back under the car but in the opposite direction. How could his body have turned 180 degrees under the car? It seems impossible. Furthermore, how could the car back into the ditch and then get back up and out of the ditch? It was hard to believe. None of the people in the nearby buildings heard Grant's screams, which should have been heard during such an accident. Everything happened quietly, so no one saw or heard anything. There were no CCTV cameras, and the 3 guys Aaron mentioned on the call were not there either. Strangely, Aaron did not attempt to rescue his son from the car, even though Aaron was briefly with him. Aaron just watched as his son died. Grant never stored equipment in the back of the car. He always left his uniform on the back seat. The phone Aaron claimed Grant was using was never found. Although Grant always carried his phone with him and called his girlfriend every morning, he didn't call that day for some reason. There was no damage to the car. Even though the rear bumper of this car model is fragile and prone to breaking, it was intact. It would have been damaged in such a descent. There were no witnesses to this tragic accident. A man saw Aaron walking along the road shortly before the tragedy, in the parking lot. It's unclear what he was doing there, although Aaron claimed he arrived later. At his son's funeral, Aaron described his death as a divine act, leaving everyone surprised. People were shocked by Aaron's lack of emotion. He showed no grief for his son. Angela suspected that he may have hit their son with his car elsewhere and staged the accident by bringing their son to the location afterwards. There was confusion as to why the pickup truck unexpectedly rolled away, as it had been parked correctly and had no previous issues. It was speculated that the truck might have had a technical fault, and although Aaron initially suggested investigating it to sue the manufacturer for compensation, he eventually declined, which was out of character for him since he usually pursued financial gains. He continued to drive the truck without any concern for several months. Angela wanted to investigate the truck herself, but Aaron strongly opposed the idea and promptly sent the vehicle to the scrapyard. This was puzzling, as the truck was in excellent condition and could have been sold for a good price. Angela managed to locate the vehicle in spring 2021 and arranged for an independent examination. Experts concluded that the accident could not have occurred as Aaron had claimed. Angela then pushed for the investigation of the case, which had been closed, to be reopened. Grant had just turned 18, according to Angela, and he had always protected Gracie's from their abusive father. He warned his father that as soon as he turned 18, he would go to court. He and his sister Gracie planned to formally free themselves from their father's control, believing the court would take them more seriously as adults. In Angela's opinion, Aaron feared this and decided to stop his son. Gracie was devastated by the loss of her beloved brother, who could protect her. On May 12, 2021, Gracie, then 14, uploaded an 18-minute video on YouTube in which she described her father, Aaron, as a monster. She claimed that he attempted to kill their mother, raped her, and physically abused both her and Grant, eventually killing Grant's. Gracie fears that her father might harm her now that her brother is gone. They are defenseless, and their father started harassing them. Despite a restraining order, Aaron continued to stalk she and begged her to return home, but she refused. She was granted legal protection, but her father ignored it and kept following her from school. Due to the school principal's friendship with he from church, they refused to enforce the restraining order. After this interview, Aaron once again complained that Gracie was being negatively influenced and turned against him. He persuaded she that she imagined everything and that her mother had suggested the idea of rape. Aaron filed a defamation lawsuit against Angela, gathering people who refuted the information in the video Gracie recorded. He claimed Angela demanded he give up custody and threatened him. Angela was determined to seek justice. At the trial, Aaron withdrew the lawsuit but is considering refiling with a new legal team. Angela and her daughter Gracie are striving for justice for Grant. Gracie prefers to live with her mother and not see her father. They launched a website and gathered support from many people after Grant's death. However, the pastor, the school principal, and other individuals denied any involvement. One of Grant's classmates mentioned that she, along with Gracie, asked the school administration to intervene and protect them from Aaron, but the school dismissed their request, saying it was beyond their responsibility. In Tennessee, there is a law requiring anyone who suspects child abuse to report it to the Department of Children. However, no one reported anything in this case. After Grant's death, students were not allowed to discuss the tragedy at school. Later, the pastor left the church, causing a significant split within the congregation. Currently, Aaron has not been charged with any crimes related to Grant, and he denies all accusations against him. Aaron's supporters occasionally post on social media, accusing Gracie and Angela of lying and behaving unchristianly. Angela and Gracie live together but are afraid of Aaron. Gracie aspires to become an FBI agent to help people through investigations. The tragic story of the Solomon family leaves behind many painful and unforgettable lessons about domestic abuse and violence, as well as society's indifference to victims. Through this story, we clearly see the need to protect children and vulnerable family members from abusive acts. At the same time, the importance of support from the community and authorities is also emphasized. Let's speak up together and protect the vulnerable so that no family has to endure such pain again. The case of Mallory Beach. Mallory Beach was born on April 18, 1999, in Walterboro, South Carolina, USA. She had two older sisters, Morgan and Savannah. At 19, Mallory graduated from Hampton High School and then attended the University of South Carolina. She worked at clothing boutiques in Fort and dreamed of becoming an interior designer. She loved animals. She had dogs and volunteered at an animal shelter. She was a bright and beautiful girl who was sweet, kind, and sociable, with many friends. She was dating Anthony Cook. They were friends with 20 years old Paul Murdaugh, who came from a wealthy and influential family. On February 23, 2019, the group planned to attend a party at a house owned by the mayor's family. They decided to travel there using the Murdaugh's 5-meter sea hunt boat. The group included Mallory, her boyfriend Anthony, Anthony's cousin Connor, Connor's girlfriend Miley Altman, Paul, and Paul's girlfriend Morgan. All were under 21, but that didn't stop them from obtaining alcohol and drinking on the boat. Although they could have reached by car, they chose to go by boat to drink beer and other alcoholic drinks en route without encountering the police. Paul was driving the boat and had already been drinking. He used his older brother Buster's ID to buy alcohol at the store, which he was quite proud of. After arriving, they enjoyed drinking and eating oysters. The party went well, and 5 hours later, they headed back home. Paul, now quite drunk, was still steering the boat. He stopped at a bar along the shore to buy more alcohol and drank there with Connor, while their other friends waited outside, eager to get home. At around 2 a.m., Paul and Connor left the bar. Everyone boarded the boat to head home. Under the influence of alcohol, Paul's behavior worsened, and he became aggressive. For half the night, Paul was in his underwear, saying he was hot, despite the cold February weather. His friends even suspected he might have taken illegal substances earlier, as he occasionally did so. Anthony, who was much more sober than Paul, wanted to take control of the boat, but Paul refused, insisting it was his boat. The other friends tried to convince he to let Anthony steer, but which nearly led to a fight on board. Anthony asked he to drop them off at the nearest pier, but he refused and mockingly suggested they call an Uber, knowing they were on a river with no access to cars. His behavior was inappropriate, and his friends argued with him. Paul repeatedly walked away, leaving the wheel unattended. He shouted at his girlfriend, Morgan, then hit her, spat on her, and pushed her so hard that she fell. Mallory and Anthony were upset by this and stayed at the stern of the boat. After seeing he hit and pushed Morgan, Mallory yelled at him to stop and calm down. However, he ignored her, angrily glaring before returning to the steering wheel. In anger at Mallory, he accelerated the boat. It sped up so much that the friends were thrown about. Anthony and Mallory clung to each other, but they couldn't hold on for long. At 2:20 a.m., the boat crashed into a bridge, causing the friends to fall into the water. When Anthony surfaced, He was quickly swept to the other side of the river by a strong current, but Mallory wasn't with him. Everyone except Mallory managed to swim to the shore. She was nowhere to be found, despite their calls and searches. Anthony returned to his friends and searched the water for she, but he couldn't find her. The boat had no lights, and although they used flashlights, the darkness made it difficult to see. Meanwhile, Paul lay in the mud under the bridge, unable to get up. It was cold outside, and the water was freezing in February. Connor called 911 at 2:26 a.m. Anthony continued searching for Mallory in the water, while Miley stayed on the shore. Morgan, Paul's girlfriend, had hit her head severely and was bleeding. After the call, Connor and Miley climb up the bridge to see if they can see Mallory from up there, but they still didn't see her. Paul went on the boat to be with Morgan. The police and ambulance arrived promptly to aid Morgan, and the search for Mallory commenced. Meanwhile, Paul remained on the boat in his boxers, speaking on the phone and gesturing. When Paul finally left the boat, he was smiling and behaving as if nothing had happened. He did not join the search for Mallory, which angered Anthony so much that he nearly attacked Paul, but the police stepped in to prevent it. The Coast Guard informed all ships to search for Mallory in the water. Meanwhile, Paul, Connor, Miley, and Morgan were taken to the hospital for treatment. Anthony stayed back to search for Mallory, despite he being soaked and very cold. At the hospital, the police came to question everyone, but Paul's father, Alex, and grandfather intervened. The Murdaughs, Paul's family, were wealthy and influential. Since 1920, they had held the position of chief prosecutor in the district. They also had their own law firm and were prominent in private practice across the district. They used their influence to pressure the police and hinder the investigation. Night searches for Mallory failed, and the next day, a large-scale search involving divers and helicopters began. Anthony did not go to the hospital and instead continued looking for she at the river. He spent days helping rescuers search for her. Volunteers eventually found her body on March 3rd, about 5 miles from the boat wreck site. An autopsy revealed that she died due to drowning and head trauma from a blunt object. She had hit her head, lost consciousness, drowned, and the strong current carried her away from the accident site. About 500 people attended her funeral. It was clear that Paul's irresponsible behavior and drunken boat driving caused this tragedy. However, the influential Murdaugh family went to great lengths to keep Paul out of prison. The police stated that it was unclear who was steering and who accelerated the boat. Paul denied being responsible, though he couldn't recall who it was. However, everyone else on the boat claimed it was Paul. The police argued that the friends' statements were unreliable because they might have been intoxicated. Paul's blood alcohol content was 3 times the legal limit. Investigators found beer and other alcoholic drinks in the boat's refrigerator. CCTV footage showed Paul buying alcohol at a local store, appearing pleased after the purchase. Moments later, he was seen crawling around the boat's refrigerator with beer. The boat's GPS indicated that the friends stopped at the pier around 12:45 a.m. Surveillance videos captured Paul and Connor at a bar, and later, the footage showed all the friends returning to the boat. Mallory family was frustrated with the inadequate investigation of the case, and the perpetrator will likely go unpunished. They initially filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the store and the individual who sold alcohol to Paul, but it was dismissed. Subsequently, they sued Buster had allowed Paul to use his ID to buy alcohol. This lawsuit was filed on April 18, 2019, which would have been Mallory's 20th birthday. Paul faced 3 felony charges: boating under the influence, causing the death of Mallory and injuring 2 others, Connor and Miley. He pleaded not guilty to all charges and was released on a $50,000 bail awaiting trial. His bail conditions allowed him to travel, consume alcohol, and operate a boat. At his court appearance, Paul, dressed in a plaid shirt, sat in the hallway on the phone, never handcuffed or in a prison uniform, and had never been jailed. While the trials are about to take place, a tragic incident occurred. On June 7, 2021, Paul and his mother, Maggie, were found shot to death at their home near the dog kennels. Alex discovered them at 10 p.m. when he returned. Paul was shot in the chest and head with a shotgun, while Maggie was shot in the head with a rifle. Only shell casings were found at the scene, suggesting two different weapons had been used, leading police to suspect two perpetrators. The shootings occurred between 9 and 9:30 p.m., shortly before Alex arrived. Paul's phone was found in an unusual position, as if tampered with, and Maggie's phone was missing. It was later located outside the residence using the Find iPhone feature. Fingerprints and DNA from the killer were collected from it. The Beach family sent a letter of condolence to the Murdaugh family. They extends their deepest and warmest sympathies to the Murdaugh family during this terrible time. Having suffered the devastating loss of their own daughter, they praise that the Murdaugh family can find some peace after this tragic loss. They sincerely hopes that someone will come forward and cooperate with the police so that the perpetrator of these senseless crimes can be brought to justice. The police have classified the deaths of Paul and Maggie as a double murder. However, there are currently no suspects, even though the investigation is still ongoing. Many have speculated whether their murders may be related to Mallory's previous boating accident. But this connection has not been confirmed. Everyone present on the boat that day provided their fingerprints and DNA samples, which did not match those found on the phone of Maggie. While details about the case remain largely undisclosed, it's known that the Murdaugh family had several enemies and received threats, but they ignored these threats. Mallory's death is not the only one linked to the Murdaugh family. Years ago, their 50-year-old housekeeper was found dead. On February 26, 2018, she allegedly tripped and fell to her death. The Murdaughs paid her family $500,000, and the case was not pursued further. Before that, on July 8, 2015, the body of 19-year-old Stephen Smith, who supposedly had a relationship with Murdaugh's family's eldest son, was discovered on a sandy road. Stephen's face was badly beaten, with a hole on the right side of his forehead and numerous bruises and cuts on his body. However, his clothes and shoes were intact, and his phone and car keys stayed in his pocket. Stephen's car was found several miles away. The medical examiner determined Stephen was hit by a car, despite the lack of skid marks, headlight fragments, or any evidence of an accident. The blow only affected his head. It was suggested that a large vehicle, like a truck, might have struck his head with its side mirror, but the origin of the hole in his head was unexplained. It was also odd that his keys and phone remained in his pocket after such a strong impact. Many believed he had been beaten to death, yet the police closed the case. Rumor has it that everyone is afraid of getting involved with the powerful Murdaugh family, which led to these cases remaining unexplored. In 2021, Connor, one of the boat passengers, also sued the Murdaugh family for trying to blame him as the boat's driver. In memory of Mallory, a non-profit charity called Mall's Buddy was created, which raises funds to build a new animal shelter in Hampton County, South Carolina. Alex Murdaugh was arrested in July 2022 after a Culleton County grand jury returned an indictment charging him with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime in the deaths of Maggie and Paul. The indictment said Alex shot his wife with a rifle and shot his son with a shotgun. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole on all 4 counts on March 3, 2023. However, Alex maintained his innocence. He soon filed for a new trial, alleging that the court clerk had tampered with the jury. A new trial court judge denied the request in January 2024. The case of Catherine Gowing. Catherine Gowing was a 37-year-old veterinarian from Ireland who had a passion for traveling and nature. One of her favorite places was the outskirts of Wales in the UK. Mold, a small town in North Wales with a population of around 10,000, is known for its restaurants, pubs, markets, and shops. It was in this town that Catherine lived. Born in 1975 into a large farming family, she was one of the youngest daughters. Her father dedicated his life to agriculture while her mother worked as a teacher. Throughout the long summer holidays, the family would work together on the farm, cultivating a strong work ethic in their children. As a result, the children eagerly participated in farming activities from an early age. Catherine always dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, so she loved working with the animals on her father's farm. The beautiful countryside captivated her, deepening her affection for rural life. Moving to Mold aligned perfectly with her desires. Catherine dedicated herself to her studies, graduating from St. Brandon's High School and then attending community college in Barry. Not only was Catherine a dedicated student, but she also excelled academically, particularly in the natural sciences, where she ranked third in the country based on her exam results. This achievement led many to believe she had a promising future ahead. After completing her secondary education, she pursued her dream of studying veterinary medicine at the University of Budapest in Hungary. At university, Catherine formed a close group of friends, including Jane Doyle, an older friend from Ireland. They shared a deep understanding. Together, they spent their free time studying, relaxing, and attending social events, all while pursuing their shared passion for veterinary medicine. After graduating as a vet, Jane found a job at a veterinary clinic in Mold, North Wales, and moved there. She then recommended Catherine for a vacancy when it became available. From the moment of interview, the clinic staff were attracted to Catherine. With her cheerful, positive attitude and high level of expertise, she demonstrated a strong passion for working with animals, winning the trust of everyone. Catherine was an outstanding psychologist, which allowed her to connect easily with the owners of her animal patients. These qualities quickly made her one of the most popular veterinarians in the city. The girls fell in love with their new environment, but since they didn't own any property, the veterinary clinic provided their accommodation, which they weren't particularly fond of. To reduce expenses, they decided to rent a house together in a nearby village called New Brighton, just a 10-minute drive from work. The year 2012 marked the peak of Catherine's and Jane's lives. At that time, Catherine was 37 years old and had been working at the veterinary clinic for a year and a half, building a strong reputation. She was attractive and charming, and her soft Irish accent attracted many men. However, she wasn't interested in starting a family yet and remained focused on her work with animals. Even when she agreed to go on dates, those relationships usually didn't last long. In October, Jane planned a weekend trip to visit her family and asked Catherine to cover her shifts at work for a few days. Jane expressed that she not only wanted to visit Ireland, but was also considering the possibility of moving back permanently to care for her elderly parents. Understanding this need, Catherine agreed to help. On October 12, 2012, the day Jane was set to leave, Catherine finished her work shift at 8 p.m. as usual. She then went to a nearby store to do some shopping. CCTV footage captured her at the store entrance at 8:06 p.m. At that time, Catherine was wearing blue jeans and a brown zip-up jacket, and she carried a bright brown bag across her body. She spent about 30 minutes shopping in the store. After she was seen on camera in different departments, she was recorded again as she left, carrying a plastic bag and a pizza box. This was the last sighting of her. Since the woman lived alone, her disappearance went unnoticed at first. The following Sunday, October 14th, Catherine was scheduled to meet a work colleague for lunch, but she never contacted him. She didn't show up and ignored his attempts to reach her. This worried her friend, who had known Catherine for a long time and found her sudden silence unusual. Initially, a co-worker assumed that Catherine was just sick and resting at home. The situation became urgent when Jane returned from Ireland on Sunday evening and discovered that Catherine was not home. Her car was also missing, and strangely the front door was unlocked. Jane searched the house for any signs of her friend's location but found nothing. Catherine wasn't answering her calls, and the house was filled with a strong smell of cleaning products, which struck Jane as odd. She also noticed that Catherine's personal items, like her car keys, handbag, wallet, and mobile phone, were missing. Jane assumed that Catherine had gone home for the weekend as planned. Exhausted, Jane went to bed despite not having slept well and knowing she needed to wake up early for her shift. She felt confident that Catherine would reach out to her in the morning, and perhaps they would see each other at the veterinary clinic where Jane worked. Jane woke up and looked around her house again, but there was still no sign of her friend. Her calls and messages to Catherine went unanswered. She then went to work, hoping to find her there, but Catherine didn't show up at the clinic. Instead of being angry about her absence, the clinic management was worried. They knew she hadn't been in touch since Friday when she left work. During that time, a few people received a brief text message from her, which surprised everyone because it didn't sound like her usual style. These messages were never shared publicly. Concerned for her safety, the employees decided to contact the police. Jane spent the entire day trying to reach Catherine, but her calls went unanswered. After finishing work, she went directly to the police station to report Catherine's disappearance. She shared details about Catherine's recent life, which helped the police eliminate her as a suspect. Jane also mentioned that Catherine's car was missing, which could potentially provide a clue to the investigation. The police quickly began their investigation by interviewing Catherine's friends and acquaintances. Everyone commented on her sense of responsibility, never changing her plans without informing someone. This raised concerns that something terrible might have happened to her. Police obtained surveillance camera footage that showed Catherine's movements from the veterinary clinic to a nearby store. After she left the parking lot, her trail went cold, making it impossible to track her any further. Catherine's parents, who live in Ireland, were promptly informed of the situation. They mentioned that their daughter had not visited them over the weekend and that they hadn't seen or heard from her in several days. Catherine's sister-in-law flew in from Wales to assist the police in the investigation and the search for Catherine. Immediately, they turned to the public through the media to gather any information about her. Unfortunately, no useful information was received. No information was received until October 16th. During this time, police believed that Catherine might have been a victim of a crime. While no blood stains were found, but police did discover fresh male DNA on her bed linen during an inspection of the victim's house. They also found a piece of cloth tied around the bedpost. It appeared that someone had come to see her while her friend was away, tied her up, and then had an intimate encounter with her. Forensic experts discovered evidence at the scene and sent it to the lab for analysis. On the evening of October 14th, while Jane was trying to contact Catherine, she received a call from Clive Sharp, Catherine's then 40-year-old boyfriend. They had argued shortly before Catherine went missing. And now Clive wanted to attract Jane's attention and buy her a present. However, Jane did not answer his phone. Before this incident, Catherine and Clive had been dating for several months. Clive, who worked as a sales consultant, lived about 150 kilometers away from Jane and Catherine's home. Despite the distance, he frequently visited them. Catherine met Clive through a dating app, and Jane was already acquainted with him. Clive often spent time at their house, but Catherine felt uncomfortable around him and preferred to leave whenever he arrived. This information reached the police, prompting them to investigate Clive's background more closely. The day after Catherine was reported missing, the police arrested Clive Sharp on suspicion of her murder. At that point, however, the investigation lacked both Catherine's body and any concrete evidence against him. Charges could not be brought against the man, so police couldn't detain him for long without evidence. However, they did obtain permission to search his car and collected material for DNA analysis, which was sent for examination. At the same time, police gathered information on the main suspect in the veterinarian's disappearance. At the same time, the police gathered information about Clive. They checked his police record. Clive has a criminal record. Despite his charming appearance, he spent 14 years in prison. His crimes were mainly sexual assault. He was first convicted of such acts at the age of 16, when he sent obscene letters and was aggressive towards a number of girls. At 17, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for rape after attacking a 15-year-old girl and threatening her with a piece of glass. After his release, it seems that Clive tried to turn his life around. He went into hiding for a while, got married, and had a daughter with his wife, Gillian. For many years, he remained off the radar of police and was not involved in any reported crimes. However, his attempts to build a normal family life did not last long. Gillian died of drug addiction. This may have had a huge impact on him. In 1995, at 26, Clive was imprisoned again for sexually assaulting his friend's wife, receiving a 5-year sentence. Just a few months after his release, he was incarcerated once more, this time for a more serious crime. He attacked a woman, bound her, raped her, and threatened her with a knife, resulting in an 8-year sentence. Remarkably, he was granted parole after serving just 5 years. In 2003, he was released and remarried. By 2011, he had ended a previous relationship and was now in a tense relationship with his girlfriend, Catherine Gowing, who had gone missing. The police found this suspicious coincidence. As a result, Clive Sharp became the prime suspect and was arrested. While in prison, he attended a specialist program designed to help sex offenders control their urges. In this program, he publicly detailed his disturbing behavior, including tying up women and threatening them. After committing the violence, he envisions 2 outcomes. He will lose interest and release the victim, or he will fantasize about killing them, envisioning scenarios in which he strangles or drowns them. The program was discontinued in 2017 after convincing evidence that it did not help solve the problem of sex offenders. While in prison, Clive claimed he had an alibi for the time when Catherine disappeared, saying he was visiting relatives. Interestingly, his daughter and her stepfather supported his claim, stating they saw him that weekend and he appeared calm. However, this did not rule out the possibility that Clive could have harmed Catherine. He could have attacked her, disposed of her body, and then gone to visit his relatives. The police examined this information for inconsistencies in Clive's story and increased their scrutiny. They soon discovered that Clive Sharp was lying. DNA test results from Catherine's bed showed a 100% match with samples taken from Clive. This indicated that he had sexual intercourse with Catherine. No one believed that the encounter was consensual. Catherine had disliked Clive and actively avoided any communication with him. The search for Catherine continued, but hopes of her safe return were slim, especially after Clive revealed he had violent fantasies. Just 2 days later, a couple walking near the abandoned Pin Flame quarry, just a few miles from Catherine's home, discovered the burned-out car. They quickly called the police. Although the car was badly damaged, the police were quick to confirm that it belonged to Catherine. By this time, news of Catherine's murder had spread throughout the community. However, no body was found in the car, and no further evidence of what had happened had emerged. As a result, many had given up hope of finding Catherine alive. Meanwhile, Clive Sharp continued to deny any involvement in her disappearance. On October 19th, the prosecutor's office concluded that they had enough evidence to charge him with Catherine's murder. Even without a body, preparations began for a long and contentious trial, with the prosecution attempting to gather all available evidence. The investigation into Clive's guilt and the search for her body is ongoing near Catherine's home, where her burnt-out car was discovered. The search involves police, volunteers, helicopters, dogs and divers who have checked all the nearby waters. On January 7, 2013, Clive had not confessed to the murder. However, the search did not last long, as divers soon found human remains in a lake near a quarry, close to the location of the burned car. Dismembered body parts were found in the reservoir, approximately 3 kilometers away. All of the remains were sent to a laboratory for testing. Experts determined that the body parts belonged to Catherine. Unfortunately, as some body parts were missing, the cause of death could not be determined. After an extensive search of the reservoir, no further remains were found. The parts that were found were sent back to Ireland for Catherine's family. Catherine's funeral was held in County Offaly, Ireland, where her family received support. Clive Sharp's trial began on January 14, 2013. Unexpectedly, he confessed to his crimes at the outset of the trial, on the advice of his lawyer, which significantly accelerated the proceedings. However, this was not because he felt remorse, but because he had little choice, as the prosecution had overwhelming evidence against him, including DNA and the cloth used to bind the victim. While the prosecution presented a detailed account of the harrowing events, the Clive remained evasive and did not fully explain what transpired in the house. According to the prosecutor, on October 12, 2012, Clive broke into Catherine's home while she was alone. He monitored her until she went to bed, then entered the house and attacked her in the bedroom, restraining her to the bed. It is believed he covered her mouth to stop her screaming for help before raping her repeatedly and eventually strangling her. After the attack, Clive went to buy cleaning supplies. He was captured on surveillance cameras at the store where Catherine had been seen alive the previous day. He bought garbage bags, cleaning products, a can of gasoline, and a Halloween mask from a nearby construction store. He also acquired a hacksaw and some blades. Upon returning to Catherine's house, he began to dismember her body, packing the pieces into bags and loading them into his car. He then cleaned the crime scene meticulously, making it impossible for forensic scientists to determine where he had dismembered her. He disposed of the remains in the water and destroyed all her belongings, including her car, which he soaked with gasoline and set on fire. To cover up his actions, Clive sold his old car and bought a new one the very next day. He boasted about this new car to Jane, while she was trying to learn what had happened to Catherine. The old car was located, and the police obtained a search warrant. During the search, they discovered fabric that matched the material used to restrain the Catherine, along with blood stains and Clive's DNA. Additionally, geolocation data from his mobile phone confirmed that Clive was near the lake and at the location where the burnt car was found right after the crime. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Clive refused to speak about the crime during the investigation. Another shocking detail emerged. The intended victim of Clive that night may have been another woman for whom he also had feelings. He tried to break into her house around 10 p.m. on the same night he attacked Catherine. Although they had been involved previously, she ended the relationship due to his rude behavior. When Clive tried to tie her up and harm her, she told him to stop and leave, which he complied with. Clive drove to Catherine's house to fulfill his disturbing desire. Around midnight, he parked nearby where he could see her house clearly. Recorded on CCTV, he waited until about an hour after she went to bed before taking action. After the attack, he returned to his car and spent an hour and a half reflecting on what he had done. He went back to Catherine's house around 3 a.m., knowing she was alone and using a key that Jane had given him, which eliminated any barriers. During the trial, Clive confessed but offered few new details. He kept his head down and avoided looking at the prosecution or Catherine's family. Ultimately, Clive Sharp was found guilty of murdering Catherine Gowing. The prosecution requested a minimum sentence of 42 years, but due to his guilty plea, this was reduced to 37 years. A monument to Catherine was later built in the Catholic Church in Buckley, funded by employees of the veterinary clinic where she worked. A year and a half after the crime, Catherine's friend Jane was still deeply affected following Catherine's death. Jane left her job at the veterinary clinic and moved to northwest England to start over.